I love this stuff. This is so fun for me. Doesn't mean it's not really hard. But like when I hear athletes talk about like it's about love of the game, that's how I feel about it.
Hey, it's Nick, and welcome to 1000 Rounds, the podcast where I explore the stories of solopreneurs who have made the bet on themselves to build a business that serves their life. Every episode, you'll hear all about the lessons they've learned and the uncommon routes they've taken to stand out in a world that is purposefully trying to commoditize them.
My name's Brendan Hufford. I help SaaS companies scale from 10 to 100 million in revenue through content.
Wow, you're the first person who's ever answered that one in one take.
I was a teacher for 10 years. So like I have a really hard like filter that everything, you'd be surprised because I say wild shit, but like it's a hard filter that it passes through where it's like, nope. Like my brain cancels most of the stuff I say.
Dude, so I have a theory on this one, and I think that filter is the difference between success that some people do and don't ever achieve. Like people told me my whole life that filter is clogged for me. And my mouth used to get me in trouble all the time. Like I used to end up in the principal's office because I'd say stupid things. But I'm convinced now that like people pay people like us to tell them what you think.
I asked my buddy Mark, we were coming home and he was on my flight back to Chicago. And he was like, I don't know how to tell you this, Brendan, but like important people trust you for answers to important things.
And you were like, why?
Yeah, like I got in trouble. I almost got suspended in high school and I got kicked out of French class like once a week for fucking laughing too loud.
The only difference between you and me is that it was Latin. It wasn't French. It was Latin class. Well, let's unpack that a bit, dude. You've been doing growth sprints for a few years now. You've talked about your story going from teacher, the burnout you've experienced, kind of just like the toll it took on your life to exit that, join a marketing agency, active campaign, like that story. You've told that story a lot. What I'm more interested in hearing about is like what I would call the rise of growth sprints, right? Like the fact that you can show up to a conference and then there's like a line of people wanting to talk to you. Like, I don't want to gas you up. This isn't what this is about, but like, this is also like we were just talking about. It's just like a reality of things. Like people want to hear what you have to think about stuff. And that's like a place that most solopreneurs want to be, whether they're big on LinkedIn or whatever like their thing of choice is. We all get paid for what we to think stuff and to tell people what we think, and hitting like being able to achieve that is highly desirable. So like, let's just talk about what do you think contributed to that?
I've done a lot of reflection. I'm also very lucky. I don't know how to explain this to people, but my brain, it was kind of, if you've ever seen Inside Out, the memories go back in and then they go to like processing and they get organized and they like get rid of the bad ones and stuff. My brain does a really wonderful job of where I don't have to do this super intentionally of connecting things. My friend Eddie from Very Good Copy, who I absolutely adore, the whole first part of his book, the Very Good Copy book, is just about like good copywriting is about good connections. And to have good connections, you have to have enough points to connect it to, which means you need more varied experiences. My brain connects things really well. There's this idea, and here's this idea, and here's this idea, and they're often good and worth pursuing. To be fair, like you talked about my backstory, like it drove me crazy the whole time I was teaching that I was having all these ideas and just could not do them. It was awful. But it's a nature thing, and it's also a nurture thing. Like I moved every 2 years growing up. Like I'm really good at making fast friends, and it has thus made me into being a raging extrovert sometimes, which is also insufferable if you have to spend long periods of time with me. But like, I think that's like the core of it. I don't mean to make this whole thing about being at a conference, but like when I was there, I wasn't asked to speak. I went as an attendee. I'm never asked to speak. That is not a thing that happens a lot in my career, nor am I sure I want it to. But like, I'm not at that level, you know, of like, oh, I speak on all these stages and stuff. Like somebody like Ross Simmons or whoever that are just wonderful and have perfected that craft, or Rand Fishkin. Like they're amazing. But while I was sitting in the audience, like 4 people like mentioned me in their talks, or like I was in the front row and just like participating. And like my friend Amrita was on a panel and she was like, oh, Brendan's my therapist. And she just like gestures over to me. And I'm like, this is so surreal. These are just friends. It's the same skill set. I just really want to make friends with them. And I like meaningful conversations. I don't do shallow surface level. I mean, you can tell even like this interaction right now. I'm like, Nick, how's your relationship with your father? Like, I want to get into that stuff and immediately, again, insufferable in the wrong context. But like, that's kind of, I think that's, and now all these people I made friends with 2, 3, 5 years ago, like we're all coming up together. And I'm seeing this kind of happen and it's very surreal. Like it's wonderful for everybody.
What you're talking about is the fact that you spend a lot of time building relationships with people and maintaining those relationships with people. And what people don't probably see about the thing that you do is all of that.
Yeah,
like,
they
it's
see me
easy
like
to look
just
at.
being a LinkedIn loudmouth and like
They're just like, look at this guy on LinkedIn talking shit, which like, hey, cool. Like definitely talk shit on LinkedIn. That's fun.
know what's for.
Like, without a doubt. But like the part where they're like, how do I get my own business there? And I think about this, like I've only been at this for just a little over a year. And one of the things that's become blaringly obvious to me was that I did not invest enough in my network before going into this. Now, me going into it wasn't exactly like my first choice. Like I got laid off and ended up here somehow. Like it was just more effective of a route for me than going back to work or whatever, trying to find a job and convince someone I can do work for them. So doing this made more sense. But when I wasn't planning on it, I was like, oh, my network is largely like your work friends. My work universe was really small. And then all of a sudden you go out into the real world and you're like, oh, I thought I was in the real world when you have a job, when you work for somebody else and you're just kind of doing your thing. And then you go out into the real world and you're like, oh, like, I don't know anybody. I know a few people. And you talk to those people and you slowly get introduced to more people and into more people. And you slowly build that and maintain those relationships. And it's finally starting to like compound and pay off because I've known people long enough where I can be a good friend where it's like, oh, hey, like this thing came up and I thought of you and I want to introduce you to this person or whatever the thing is. And so like you're way ahead of the curve compared to the mass migration that just took place. So like, as much as we're talking about like all of these wonderful things, like this is because you met a bunch of people and you've built relationships with people over the course of years versus the tons of people who have recently gone so in the last 6 months to a year, including myself. And they're like, acquiring clients is hard.
You can't find this book anywhere. Because I don't know what happened to Sean McCabe, but he deleted everything off the internet and he was one of the most influential people in my whole life. Like he just disappeared completely. But he wrote this book called Overlap. And it was literally just about like how first the idea of like your thing overlaps with the next thing, which overlaps with the next thing, like contextually, but also how to do that. And that's how I've done everything. Like everything I do, the next thing I do is going to overlap with this thing. I can see it looking backwards. There's like a Steve Jobs quote about like how you can only see these things looking backwards. You can only connect the dots that way. I think that's super true. Like the dream was this, but I had no idea I was going to get there. I just knew directionally keep making friends. And I was very lucky that I liked that. That's not natural for everybody. They feel really uncomfortable or they have a lot of imposter syndrome. So do I. I equally feel like 100% imposter. I'm lying to everybody here. I can't do anything and I'm the worst and I'm better than everybody else.
Why do you feel like you're the imposter?
So I think it's a lot of like growing up the way that I grew up. Like I didn't have a lot and things like that. And I also just had like a lot of like childhood stuff of like getting made fun. You know, you're a new kid. You moved to different schools. Like I'm good at making fast friends, but like you also get a rough amount of getting picked on and bullied and all of that sort of stuff. I think that's part of it. And I think it's also just like having done what I did for so long. Like it's just still surprising. And I don't know that that goes away for anybody. You know, like just you hear about people like that are really good speakers, like I mentioned earlier, they don't not get nervous. They just navigate it. They just know like, oh, I'm going to get the adrenaline dump and my voice is going to sound like it's up here for the first 5 minutes and then it's going to settle and I'm good. And that settling process happens faster and faster and faster over time. I think even though like some people might have a feeling about where I am in my journey, like I still feel like I'm very early on this stuff. So even though I've been building all of these things, like my experience for a long time was like running a full-time business and having a full-time job. And only in the last 2 years have I been able to like focus.
I don't think that feeling ever goes away. Like I interviewed Christopher Fox just recently, and he's been at it 17 years. And I'm pretty sure that feeling doesn't go away. I just interviewed Melanie Diesel recently, and she's been at it for almost 10 years. Like you said, this like idea of overlap where it's like you're kind of always looking around, trying to look around the bend and see what the next thing is. And it's like, figure this out. Like, I think anyone who believes that they have it all figured out, you're just lying to yourself, or like just you're lying to other people.
I think when you have it all figured out, you're not growing anymore. You're not trying new stuff. Like Mel's written books. We're both friends with Jay Acunzo. Jay's written books. I've never written a book. I think I have one in me. I think I have a lot of them in me. But like, I'm going to push into writing a book, and that's going to make me feel like a total imposter again. I'm going to push into speaking. That's going to make me feel like an imposter. Like, if you're not pushing and like taking on new challenges or like bigger client, like whatever kind of work you do, you work with clients, you're taking on bigger clients, new engagements, trying other things, you get asked for, you do great at what you do. And your clients are like, can you also do these 17 other and more important things for us? And you're like, I think I can. That's where that imposter syndrome comes from, where you're just like, or you're doing what I do and what Mel and Jay talk about like creating IP. Like, that's scary. Like, I'm going to own these words. When people think about these words, the mental availability, if you've ever read like Byron Sharp's books, like when they think about these words, they think of me. That's super scary, right? These things work. Like, I'm a marketer, right? Like, it works. But then when it actually works, I think there's a little part of us that are like, whoa, that's cool. If we want to get really deep, like there's just like a healthy distrust of like what we're thinking and feeling at any given time, where you're keenly aware of like, I feel scared, or like, I feel like I'm doing a great job. Like, there's that sort of piece too, psychologically. I just move with like an irrational confidence around these things, which I think, like I said, is childhood based, but also just my personality.
Well, confidence is definitely key. Like, you got to believe in yourself, and whatever that sounds like. Like, you have to actually believe that you can do the thing. But I think the imposter syndrome comes from trying to swing way too far. And this is like the running joke of like the 22-year-old who's like the VC or like the CEO coach.
Yeah, the 22-year-old life coach. You're like, please tell me about your vast life experience.
I talked with someone who was just getting started, and they were like, I'm a CMO, like I'm a consultant for CMOs of tech companies. And I was like, maybe not. And so like, I think imposter syndrome comes from going too far down the road. Like, our mutual friend, Andrew Kaplan, always talks about helping like junior me, like junior versions of himself. And I think that's like the way to think about, or like how to eliminate the imposter syndrome. It's just like, you need to help the version of you 2 years ago. And if you're always thinking about like, who needs you today, you 2 years ago. You don't need someone who is a million miles down the road. They've probably lost sight of what you're dealing with today. A lot has probably changed since they went through what you went through today. So it's like, someone who just went through that is the person you want. And I think we all tend to struggle with imposter syndrome when we're going way too far out of that world we're in. It's like, and you can gradually work your way up. Like you were saying, it's like, oh, this client's a little bigger. They're asking me to do a little project that's a little bigger. They're asking me to do things I haven't done. But it's like, you're slowly moving. It's not like one day you wake up and publicly traded company is asking for your help. Like, you got to get there.
It takes time, right? And that's such a cliche thing. I kept my job way longer than I should have. I should have left 6 months, maybe even a year earlier. Maybe that's wrong. But I kept it way too long. And I wanted to stay long enough that when the inciting event, which I'm happy to talk about, when the inciting event happened where I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore, it was laughable how fast my wife and I were able, like, we were just able to be like, fuck that. Like, I'm out. And I put in my 2 weeks. Short story long, I went on vacation. It caused a ton of turmoil at the company that I was at. And I remember looking at my wife in the car, and she said, and I'm not trying to cool guy anybody about money, but everybody's weird about money. You never like know how much people are making. It's fucking bizarre. But like, the real conversation, I don't think I've ever talked about this. The real conversation my wife and I had is, she looked at me and she's like, Brendan, ActiveCampaign pays you $95,000 a year. You're going to make $500,000 this year, and you're worried about the 95K of that 500. you keep telling me like, oh, maybe when I make another 100,000, I can quit. Because it started like equal, right? It was 95 and 95 and, or, whatever. It just kind of kept going like this. And eventually it outpaced and it was half of my income. Then it was 2/3. Then it was 3/4. And at this point, it's like 4/5 of the income. It's 80% of my income is outside my day job. And she's like, you're so stupid. Like, just quit. And it was all I needed. I just needed her on board. And the fact that she proposed it first was like, cool, we quit tomorrow. I'm out.
I have 2 kids. Like, my wife is a full-time mom. She works for the boys. Like, I get that tension where you're like, it doesn't matter what the number is. You're just like, I need to provide for my family. Like, that's just the paternal instinct. If there's more hours in the day and there's like between 9 and 5, I will do the thing in order to make the money so that we can live the best possible life. Like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, would they have enough? Would they be okay? Like, you're always thinking about those things. And you have 4 kids, so it's multiplied from, like, I have 2 and I feel this way. If I had 4, I'd just be like, nobody talk to me.
The thing I think about a lot is I will do what is required.
You say the number out loud, and I bet when you say that and you tell that story, you're like, that sounds insane.
As an assistant principal making $50K a year, and now I'm talking about adding a 0 to the end of that. Like, what is that about? That's wild. Never in a million years.
First of all, dude, like, that is a milestone that so many people like dream of achieving. So like, it is not without hard work. Like, you did the thing.
Oh yeah, like I got up at 3 a.m. for like 5 years. I had a morning routine. I read Miracle Morning. I didn't come up in proper digital marketing like an adult. I came up in online marketing, which is a lot of like personal development stuff. And that's how I came up. So it was like my Miracle Morning, right? Which is actually a great book. I think more people should read it, by Hal Elrod. And I was taking cold showers and I was going to the gym at 3 a.m. And like most of the people who do it suck. But I talk about a lot like a tactics debate versus a quality debate. Like, just because most of the people who do this thing are douchey and suck, it doesn't mean the ideas are bad. It doesn't mean like gratitude and visualization and journaling and like ice baths, as corny as they are, like physical training, intense physical training. None of those things are bad for you. Like, you should probably do some of that stuff if you want to. And if you can't figure out how to escape a life you hate, like, try some of that shit. I don't know. But like, those are the only hours I had. I was a teacher and like I taught high school. So like, if you're not on your shit, those kids will eat your lunch. So I wasn't fucking around during the day. Nick, there was also times where I like stayed up super late. Like I would be putting my kids to bed with this cup, like a face-sized cup of coffee, putting my children to bed so I could stay up until 2 a.m.
But what were you doing during those hours that you feel like contributed to the growth?
So instead of learning stuff, I have this, again, irrational thing where I just make the things that I want to see in the world. Like, nobody was doing, let's talk about assets I have now. So I have a newsletter, I have a Slack community, but like I was reading all of Lenny Rachitsky's interviews about product. And I was like, oh, these are like really in-depth. The subject lines were beautiful. Like how Miro builds product, how Figma builds product. And it's just, he's asking the same questions every time, but it's stuff nobody talks about. Like, how do you build, SaaS products behind the scenes? And I was like, well, everybody does these shitty marketing teardowns where they're like, oh, how Canva grew. And it's like an SEO chart and like a picture of some of their ads. And I'm like, you can't be $1 billion a year revenue company and think that it's just these 2 publicly available data sets. Like, that's dumb as shit. So I just started being like, let me talk to CMOs and be like, what do your meetings look like? How many people are on your team? How do you structure them? How do they work together? I took Lenny Rachitsky's questions about product and I asked them to marketing leaders because like, I don't know. Like, I just didn't know where to start. And I've since morphed those questions quite a bit. Like, there became a big question about hiring. Like, how do the top CMOs attract and retain the top talent? Like, that's a thing CMOs need to know that nobody talks about, right? Like, how do you build a talent pipeline where all the best people in the world want to work for you and they're willing to work for you for less money than they'd take somewhere else? Neither here nor there, but like, the newsletter happened because it didn't exist. Nick, I tried to find it. I tried to subscribe to it. It did not exist, so I made it. I tried to find a Slack community for in-house SaaS marketers when I was in-house at Active Campaign. It did not exist. I joined them all. I joined all the paid ones. I joined all the free ones. They all fucking sucked. And I was like, I'm making my own. Like, this is specifically for in-house software marketers. It is so specific. And I built this like cool little clubhouse. And there's 1,000 people in there now, but really it's like 40 of us that are just having a great time carrying most of the conversation. And it's a great resource for everybody else. But like, it's our clubhouse. Wouldn't trade it for the world, but I make these things that I want to see in the world. They just don't exist.
I like that missionary mindset. Like people who see the opportunity and they're like, we can make $1 million. It's not nearly as compelling and you're not nearly as motivated to make it not suck. Like those things generally suck or peter out over time when they fall out of favor. Whereas you're like, if I can make this clubhouse the thing that I wish I had when I was in house selling tech, people will want to be there.
Yep. And I violently protect it. Like you're not coming in there and pitching. It's not open to freelancers. It's not open to consultants. And I realize I am that now. I'm just not changing the mission of it. And the other thing that's cool is when you build things, like they both lose money. Those things don't make any money. I don't have sponsors. I'd love it if you want to sponsor my newsletter, let me know. But like I don't have sponsors. Like that's not how, you see other people being like, oh, we made $1 million this year and you're like 97% with sponsorships, and that's fine. Monetize however you want. I'm not better than you. But like it's also cool on the other side, like you can go another way and just make enough from clients and then build shit you want and let it lose 10, 20, 30 grand a year because who cares?
You talk about like the mission behind building the community and then like why you started the newsletter. What about growth sprints as a service and as a thing? Like how'd you get to that productization? Like how'd you figure that out and realize this is the thing I'm going to do as a thing, not necessarily as a company, but like the way that you operate and the way that you help businesses grow? Because that's a thing that I get asked a lot about is like, I don't have a system. I don't have my own growth sprint.
Okay, so I got really lucky. I'm going to tell a long story, so stick with me. It's very good. I came up in SEO and I started following this guy on YouTube. And he would make these videos where he would be like, all right, let's get into it. And he would there was no like YouTube-y intro. And I was like, this is amazing. And then he would be like, if you want to buy these Google Sheets that I'm showing you in here, you can pay for them. And my broke teacher ass was like, I don't have any money for those. So let me just pull it up on one tab and make my own sheet in the next tab. And I just built the things that he had. It was so hacky, right? Like I got to the skill set by making things. I didn't like take a bunch of courses or anything. I was just like, I need to figure out how to send people emails. Let me learn email marketing. Oh, I know I love podcasts. Let me make my own podcast. Like that's where all of this has come from. I just made my own shit 25 times. So I remember getting an email. I signed up for some of his emails and his name is Ryan Stewart. And I didn't have $1,000. And then he sent out an email, and I now realize this is like a classic nurture sequence. Sent out a fine, and he's like, hey, this is the last email I'm going to send you about this. You obviously haven't bought, but if for whatever reason money's the issue, we can stretch it out. It's $1,000, but we can stretch it out over a year. And when you're a teacher, and I got to like look at my wife and be like, God, are we going to be able to swing $100 a month for this? Like, I think it's going to make a difference. So I did it. I had the money. It wasn't some like wild, like it was my last dollar and then I couldn't feed my children. Like people hype up their stories like that stuff. And I'm like, that's reckless. That's not inspiring. You're dumb. Like I said, quitting the job and stuff, like I'm super risk averse. All these gaggle of goblins running around. Like, nope. Sorry. I call my kids goblins all the time.
This okay. My boy, I call them tiny little dictators. So I get it.
I got in Ryan's ecosystem and I have this thing where I will take what you teach. I will go do the thing, and then I will tell you that I did it. I know that sounds really simple, but if you want to get on anybody's radar ever, no matter how big they are, hey, famous author, I read your book. I did everything you said. Here's how it transformed my life. All of a sudden, they're like, can I get a quote from my homepage? Do you want to hop on a Zoom call? Like all of a sudden, they're your number one fan because you did. Nick, you already know this. You put out so much education, you teach so many things, and then like nobody does anything with it. So if somebody actually goes and does the thing, you're like, you get unlimited attention from me. I'm your number one fan now. It worked out for me so much. So I went to a conference Ryan was speaking at, not just because of that, but like I was part of this SEO community. Went to a conference afterwards, walked up to him really awkwardly. I told him basically what I just told you, that story of like, I bought it. Here's how it changed my life. I now work at an agency. I quit my teaching job. I was making $40K a year. I make 75 grand now. Totally changed my life. And I said, when I went into the interview at the agency, they were like, hey, how are you going to help us with SEO? And I just spun my laptop around and I said, Ryan, I showed them your sheets. And I was like, this is how I run it. Do you want me to come do it here? And I got an offer the next day. And he was like, wow. And then that turned into, hey, do you want to be a member of my community? Do you want to lead my community? Hey, do you want to be my number 2 guy in this community of agencies? And like all of this sort of stuff came really, really slow over 5 years organically. Like I get to write for Ryan Holiday, if anybody's familiar with him. Like I wrote an article about stoicism for him because I was like, here's the thing, right? Like I just cold emailed him. Hey, I read this. Here's how it transformed my life. Here's the story. And he's like, would you write about that for my blog? And I'm like, I have an article on dailystoic.com. It's wild. All of those things. I can give you 50 stories of this, but I've been doing this forever. It is just how I work. I got into his ecosystem. The thing we taught, I decided, and he's cautioned me. He's like, nobody's going to believe you because you work here. And I'm like, well, my website has to be the exact way we teach people to make their websites. My marketing, my positioning, everything. And he was big on messaging and positioning, productization, and all of this stuff. And I learned it by doing it for myself, seeing big results, and teaching it to hundreds of other agency people for like 3 or 4 years. That's where those pieces came from. I can walk through like why I run things the way I specifically do, but that's where the pieces of Growth Sprints came from. And I've also been running Growth Sprints on the side since 2021 or something, not long after I left the agency. Was that when I was in-house, it didn't conflict anymore. So as soon as I left an agency, I could start my own consulting a little bit more. But I think like that's where like the bones came from.
What you're saying about doing a thing and then telling them about it is a huge eye opener for me, because I didn't even realize I was doing, and I did what you did.
Mm-hmm.
When I first got started, I reached out to Christopher Lockhead, and he's written a bunch of books, done a bunch of stuff. When I was getting started, it's like reading all his work, and I closed my first client, and I sent him a Loom video and a LinkedIn DM, and I was like, hey, your work helped me get this first client. Like, I just want to say thank you. Changed my life. You earn your first dollar selling consulting services, and you're like, your brain is rewired.
I remember I got my first like affiliate dollar from like sending out an email, and I was just, my wife, I told I came in the other room, I'm like, Liz, we just made $75. She's like, from what? And I was like, that's shit I've been working on in the spare bedroom, dude. Like, isn't that wild? And again, like teacher, no money, $0.
Do it again like 150,000 more times.
Yeah. And it was just like stuff like that just like kept happening. And it like, yeah, dude, you always remember that. I remember the first jujitsu gi that I sold, all of that stuff. How did Chris respond?
He was like, exactly what you described. He was like, thank you so much for sharing this with me. He was so like warmed by the fact that it made it, like his work made a difference.
I mean, that's his oxygen, right? Like you just fueled probably another 6 months of him being like, I can do this.
And he's doing his thing. And I think one of the things that is changing, and as you're saying this, I've been thinking about this for a while. It's like access to these people. Like you used to have to go to a conference and be like, hey, just want to let you know, like I did the thing and I like started, and here's what I did with it. It's like, I can send someone a Loom video on a LinkedIn DM now and get access to them. And it's like, there are some people who don't respond. Then there's people who do. And it's like, you start building that relationship with them, and all of these little things add up, right? This is that compound relationship stuff that makes a huge difference, because now I'm part of their courses and their academy, and like they quoted me in one of their books. And so exactly what you're talking about, that's the stuff that really adds up. And I don't think we take enough merit in terms of like what it means to do that, to build your business.
I think you can call it, if you wanted to put a pin in it, you call it like a poster boy strategy, poster girl strategy. Like you want to be that person that's on the front page of their website, their number one testimonial. And all of a sudden you're on 6 websites as their number one testimonial, and every bit of traffic they get, they see you. That feels like the incentives are wrong, because it's like the background is you had to do a ton of work and you did transform your life already. So you don't really need, being on the front of the website anymore. But it is cool. Like it is a great way to think about things. And if that fuels you to make a transformation in your life of like, oh, I'm going to get on this person's radar by doing the great things that they're teaching, like, great, you get double outcomes,
Yeah. Well, I didn't even consider the downstream things of it. It was just like, oh, wait a second. Like I was just really thankful. I was like, I closed my first client. And now, like, I left a comment on one of Jay Akunzo's posts right after I joined the Creator Kitchen. And I was like, new lens on my work, been here for 48 hours. And the amount of people who reach out to me and be like, hey, I saw you on the Creator Kitchen website and I looked into your work, like, and I'm interested in like what you do. I just was really appreciative that the Creator Kitchen exists. And I just left a comment on a LinkedIn post Jay had. And I was like, hey, I enjoy enjoying the Creator Kitchen. All of those little things, like, hey, when I do stuff with the things that you're doing, you become their biggest fan. I love that idea. All right. I want to look back a little bit on all these years. What's something you would have done differently?
There's always the answer of like, it got me here, so I wouldn't change that. Right? I couldn't have learned these lessons. This couldn't have happened. I think there's a truth to that of like, I needed all of this. What I would have changed though is people look at like a prolific amount of output from you, or they look at like a prolific amount of success or whatever they want to call it in their own heads. And what they don't see is that like the stuff we're digging into today. And what a lot of people don't see, because I don't make it a part of my marketing, I'm not like trying to trauma market here or get pity from anybody, but like I've put myself in the hospital twice from stress, and I still have catastrophic after effects of the stress that like the body truly does keep the score of this stuff. I understood that that is the thing that could happen, and you don't realize until it happens to you, until you're 35 and you get a blood clot in your leg and the ER is like, we're glad you're here, right? Like that was part of the inciting event that got me to leave in-house, where I was just like, this is an untenable amount of stress. When I left an agency that I was at, I was put under so much toxic stress, and I was navigating it in the pandemic with a pregnant spouse and 3 kids at the time. Like I said, now we have 4, doing all of that, and all the kids are home all the time. And it is the worst professional environment I've ever been in. I had a 3-day long migraine. I've never had that before, but like I couldn't see. I couldn't function. And when I came out of it, my eyes stopped working. You blink between your eyes and it looks different because they're in 2 different places. But like your brain puts them together. It's like it's one picture. My brain stopped. It's like 2 pictures now, all the time, double vision. Impossible to read. I just had to like close my eye all the time, or like do one of these guys. And even now, when I look to the side, one of my eyes like looks straight up, like it's just detached. It goes the wrong way. It's that sort of stuff. Like I still have those things, right? Like for me, this hasn't been without a cost. And it's usually me needing to have a health impact to know that it's time to move to the next thing. And every single time, I've always been building the next thing already. I've just not moved fast enough. You know, the pain of staying the same wasn't greater than the pain of changing, as my friend Lachey would say. So I think that's like the biggest thing that I would do over but I don't know that I could know that without having had those things. Obviously I didn't, because I still did it twice. But I would change that. Like if I just got like a fresh do-over, I'd have like way less massive health impact.
Dude, the fact that you put yourself through this is crazy. Like most people would have just given up and been like, my head's starting to hurt. Like maybe I should just get a different job or something. Like, why is this so meaningful to you?
Probably a bit of sunk cost, right? Like I've been working on this for a very long time, and I've put out a heroic amount of work into this. I use the word privilege very intentionally. Like I am both born with a tremendous amount of privilege. If we're honest, I am playing, right? Like I'm a straight dude in the Midwest that, you know, had a good enough childhood and a great education. And, you know, it's 2024. Like there was a video game setting that was easier than easy, like I'm playing the game on that, because I just fucking hate it when white dudes are like, dude, look at how hard I worked. And then, you know, like I talked to my friend Taz, and like her experience is very different than mine, or my friend Lachey, like her experience is very different than mine. Like, let's acknowledge that I have a lot of inherent privilege. But it is also, I use the word privilege to describe like doing this kind of work. Like I really love it. And I've always known that this is worth it. Similar to my wife and I having kids. Like we struggled for a long time to have kids. We went through a lot of like IVF and other, you know, treatments and stuff like that. Now that we have kids, we don't take them for granted. Like a lot of people begrudge their children, right? They don't understand the amount of work over, again, years that we put in to have this family. So we feel very differently. And I feel very differently about my career because I've worked so hard for it. As far as like why do I put myself through it? I have a very all or nothing personality. My brain is wired for, again, to my own detriment, like if one is good, all is best. So that is true of revenue. There's no amount of money I can make where I'm like, I'm working on this, like actively working on figuring out like what my enough numbers are for different things. There is no amount of money I can make where I'll be happy. There is no number of pounds I can deadlift where I would be happy. There's no amount of pizza that would make me happy. It's all of it. My brain is like, you have one or you have 1,000. And the same is true for drinking. Like I don't drink anymore because my brain is like, you'll have one most days, but there's always going to be one day a year that you're going to have 35 beers. Like it's just something. And I've kind of noticed, again, looking backwards, you notice this trend. And I think that is also a piece of why I do what I do. I think that this type of work allows for a lot more scale than other work. You know, if I owned like a detailing business, there's a human requirement. I can't scale infinitely versus my work doing this and who I do it for. They have pretty good scale and so do I. So that, I think there's that piece. And like, honestly, Nick, I really like this. Like, I really do. Like, very sincere. I'm trying not to like get emotional, but like, I really like this shit. I love software. I think it's so cool. And I also love marketing. Like, I was literally rereading my buddy Ed's book, very good copy. And like, I'm sitting there, I'm reading this sentence, just crying my eyes out. In a book about copywriting. I'm so moved by a story he tells in here. I love this stuff. This is so fun for me. Doesn't mean it's not really hard. But like when I hear athletes talk about like it's about love of the game, that's how I feel about it.
We are cut from the same cloth for the simple fact that there's no amount of information or like reading or whatever that can quench the thirst. Like I very much have this similar addictive personality. Like my wife is like, you can fall down any rabbit hole. It doesn't matter if it's work related. It's the ADHD. It's really what it is. And you just get sucked into stuff and you're like, I have to.
Yeah, you're like, what's your latest hyperfixation? And it's like, let me tell you about it.
Yeah, you're like, oh, let me tell you about door jams. And it's like, I just moved into a house that's 105 years old. And it's like, oh, these like locks, these like special type of mortise locks. And I went and learned everything you could possibly know about these specific locks that are in this house that they don't make anymore and all this stuff. And like, it's a rabbit hole. Here's the point. I feel you on the addictive personality. It's the fact that you're just like, I have to go. I have to know. And the fact that like you care enough to really like to want to do this work because it helps people. It helps people do better work, more, they're happier at their own job and their own business and the thing that they're trying to do. Like it helps people. So you're like, oh, wow, that's really motivating. The deeper I fall into this work and this rabbit hole, like this other really good thing happens. One of the things that my wife had to tell me when I first got into this work was she was like, the answers are not in your screen. Like sometimes when you're just trying too hard, come spend time with your family, the answers are not in your screen. And that was like a weird moment for me because I was like, oh, but like if I'm not looking at the screen, like when am I going to do the thing? And then all of a sudden it snaps into place and you realize the answers in fact were not in your screen. You do your best work thinking about the problem and working on the problem when you're not actively thinking about the problem and working on the problem. It's weird how your brain does that stuff. It's like when you're walking the dog or taking a shower, it's like why you have all your best ideas. It's for that reason.
Ed talks about this thing about noticing and like how there's this assignment at like, I think it's like a Harvard course. I just had the page open. I don't know why I'm not reading it to you. Where like the first assignment is to go look at a painting for 3 hours, just fully slow down. And it's like you're just building that muscle of noticing. And then after 45 minutes, you can smell the painting. Not the physical painting, but like being there. What does that place smell like? And then you're like, oh, the curtain in the background is actually the exact same as the guy's ear. That's wild that the artist did that. Or like the shape of the bow tie is the same shape as the mouse on the bottom of it. Like just the slow noticing of things. And like, I agree with you. And I think that's kind of a piece of what you're describing of like, it is like getting away from the work and allowing that like back stuff to process, to make those connections for you. And then when you return to your work, you're like, oh, okay, that's clear now.
1000%. And it's not the stuff that you can do in the first few minutes of looking at the problem. looking at the painting, right? Like you have to sit there and give yourself the space to do it. It's like, it was tough for me to create the space in my life to get those things. I'm very much like, oh, like I got to solve this thing now.
Big same. I've always just thrown more time at things. I also, like, especially being in the position I'm in now, am very careful about my health and my relationship with my children. And I picked an office that like where I'm sitting talking to you right now is right across the street from my kids' school. And I did that not just because it's an amazing space, but I take him to school every morning. I walk my boy to school every single. We could drive to my office, park the car. Sometimes he comes in here and plays if we're early. If we're not, which we are mostly often not early, and then we just walk across to his school and I hold his little hand, and I give him a kiss, and I say goodbye to him, and he loves going to school every day. You know how many dads get that experience? Like zero, almost none. I wouldn't trade that for anything. Like that's the best. That is why I do this, right? Like it very much is like that motivation I have. Maybe I need to take my answer back of what I said earlier because I think it's all those pieces, but it's also like I remember when my first son was born, he had what's called a pneumothorax, where when he took his first breath, he ripped his lung. Apparently, it's super common, but a little bit of air, then the lung heals, and then there's like an air bubble outside the lung. And so he was in the NICU, and while he was in the NICU, they're like, he has a really elevated white blood cell count. That usually means he's got a pretty bad infection. Like, we should look at this. So he's in the NICU for, we're in the NICU for like a week. And when you're in the NICU, you get a very shocking look at reality and like how tragic other people's situations are, like around like newborn babies. Like it's bad. I have to take a deep breath and calm down. You get that. But I remember like I can fucking feel the like little plastic bin that he was in and like looking at him and stuff. And like, it's that so much more than like, oh, I love software. Like it is that. But it's also like this, like as we're talking, my brain is like peeling back. Like I told you, like this processing happens. Like I like peel back layers. I think that's it so much more than the other pieces. There is also such like a good fundamental truth. Like, there's this James Earl Jones thing where like I forget the play, but like his son's like, why don't you like me? And they go through this whole back and forth. And he's like, I don't have to like you. It's my duty. It's my responsibility to take care of you. You're my child. I feel that so much more deeply than just like a overarching duty or any sort of like primal, like the species needs to survive. So we've made these animals that care about their young. Like it's not just that. For me, it is. I tell people a lot of times, like it's not business, it's personal. Like this is all very personal. Like every time a client is like, I don't feel like paying my invoice or some shit, I'm like, you're taking money, like you're taking food out of my kids' fucking mouths and I'll kill you. Like, I get very like, I have a very visceral reaction to it. So like, and maybe that's good or bad, but that's how I'm wired. And like, I think that's like where a lot of this comes from. Does that make sense?
1000%. This is, first of all, it is all personal. I don't like, we're all people. And if you're doing business and you don't think it's personal, you're lying to yourself.
Has anybody else gotten this emotional talking about this stuff? Like
you just topped the most emotional one.
Perfect.
For sure. Here's what you said makes me feel. One of my wife's very good friends had their child very early, very prematurely. They have been in the hospital in the NICU since January. It is now middle of September. It is really hard to see this happening, like to watch this baby fight. And on August 8th, my wife and I walked into the hospital. She had a baby. Well, we walked in the day before, but like whatever, like the thing. She had a baby, and then that was that. And I looked at her and I was like, how amazing, like how insanely blessed this whole thing. Like, so yeah, what you're talking about, like, is not lost on me. This is way bigger than anything I could have ever imagined. And so 1000%, dude, I feel you. And it's like, it's not lost on me, like how special those things are and how fragile they are. And it's like, you look at this kid and you're like, I'll do anything.
I love how you synthesize that. That was our perspective, was our whole conversation. Everything we've talked about today is perspective.
All right, man, let's end here. What do you want to build that you haven't built yet? What does the future of growth sprints really look like?
So I look up a lot to the team at Exit 5 and like what they've built and stuff. And part of me, again, like equally competitive, thinks I'm better than everybody. I'm like, I could build that too. I think I can do that. We can all acknowledge that's insane, right? But like part of me is like, I thrive with this. I love this kind of interaction. It's the best part of my day. And I don't have it in my business. I don't have a podcast. I don't do webinars or digital events. I don't do in-person events. I do nothing like that. And part of me is like, dude, this is what lights you up. This is your background. Like, this is where you index the best. Why aren't you doing that? And so I think that's what's next. Like, I think it's starting to do more events, maybe a podcast in the future. I'm just, we're both fans and friends of Mel and Jay. So I'm not doing anything without a rock solid premise to start it. That's why I've been waiting so long, because I have ideas. I have concepts of a plan for this. Silly. Did you see the debate where they asked former President Trump, like, do you have a plan for healthcare? He's like, I have concepts of a plan. It's like, dude, you had 9 years to come up with it. Come on. You should have had a better answer. Anyways, that's what I have right now. And that's where I think things are going to go in the future, where it is more about gathering together and supporting each other together. It is more about real community, not audience where it's me to them, but real community where I'm just the facilitator. I just got the room and the snacks, and then we all do this together. You
got the orange slices.
Yep. I brought the orange slices and the Capri Suns and the high C Ecto cooler, and then you guys do the rest.
1000% with the high C Ecto cooler. This show is a product of like Mel and Jay in the kitchen, like the premise and the thing. So I'm with you there. Like, and I wrestled with it for a really long time. And part of me was like, stop thinking about the work and just go do the work, dude. Part of it is just go interview somebody and see what happens and try really hard. And then go show like the same thing. I was like, hey, Jay, look, I did this show and like people really like it. Someone just reached out to me today and was like, I just binged like 10 episodes. Thank you. Like, I was like, whoa.
It is a personal development thing. Like, it's easier to turn a moving vehicle is something I think about a lot.
I tell people you can't steer a stationary ship.
Same thing.
Like
Love it.
Yeah, same thing. Same exact thing.
You have to go. You have to do the thing. Hopefully that's people's takeaway.
Dude, this has been so much fun. This is, I thank you for coming on and sharing everything.
Dude, I just wanted you to have fun. I adore you and I think the world of you. So I'm just happy to like be a part of this. So thank you.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that very much. So thank you for coming on, sharing your story. I know more people feel seen because of it, and I cannot wait to catch up with you soon.
Cool, man.
Hey, Nick again, and thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the 1000 Routes newsletter, where I process the insights and stories you hear on this show into frameworks and lessons to help you build a new and different future for your own business. You can sign up at 1000routes.com or check the link in the show notes. All right, dude, what would be your last meal on Earth?
It's a quick answer, but I just want to get it right. I'm a volume food guy. Like, it doesn't have to be great. I just need a lot of it. That's so bad. It's very unhealthy. It is something I've struggled with my whole life. It would probably just be like unlimited tacos, like bottomless tacos. With every choice of sauce and anything, like I want barbecue sauce in my tacos. I want buffalo wing. Tacos are the perfect delivery system for food, personally.
All the fixins is what you're saying.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to say tacos, but then it's actually all the other foods. But I love a lot of condiments.
I'm with you on that one. It's just a vessel for the sauce.
Yeah. People are like, oh, I'd want a steak or something. And I'm like, cool, I want 7. Whatever it is, I just need unlimited. It's the last one. How dare you tell me where a meal begins and ends? What is it? The bit that the meal's not over when I'm full, the meal's over when I hate myself?
Yes, I was just thinking that. And then Greg Giraldo has this whole bit on it's death by chocolate. Like, how have we trivialize, what kind of society have we become where you trivialize death like that? He's like, did you leave any room? That was all he's saying. Did you leave any room for dessert? It's like, can we stuff any more food into your fat, bloated esophagus that you
That's so good. It's actually a sales technique where they're like, you ask people what dessert they're getting before you have them order dinner, because otherwise nobody orders dessert. But if you get them to do it ahead of time.
True.